Light quality is another characteristic of light I wanted to talk about. So light quality can be a little bit tricky to understand, but I think it helps to think about light being either harsh or light being very soft. So you have harsh light and very soft light. And light quality is linked very closely to light direction. Let me explain. So in order to understand harsh versus soft light, it is good to think about the surface, some kind of surface. So this could be really, if you look at any surface up close, usually you do not see a straight line. More often than not, you see something that's a little bit more jagged, right? So this could be you looking up close at an asphalt road, or this could be you looking up close at your carpet, or for that matter, this could be you looking up close at your own skin, right? I mean, we would love to have a perfectly smooth skin, but we know that if you look at your skin up close, it is kind of like a jagged organ, isn't it? And now let's imagine that we have a light source. So I'm going to draw, of course, a sun, a universal symbol for a light source, our sun. And let's say that this is the only light source we have in this scene. This is the only source of light. So we start getting all of this direct light from the sun. Now, what happens to the surface? Well, what happens is that this side of the surface gets light and this side of the surface remains dark, right? So we start seeing one side of these little things over here much darker. All right. So this is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, the sun or whatever light source hits this side and the other side becomes darker. All right. So if you deal with a situation where you have only one light source and the light source is producing a very direct light, you can expect to create a lot of shaded areas like this. Now this is us looking at the surface from the side, but if we were to flip this, if we were to look at the surface from above, so you start seeing these very defined lines. Dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, bright. Again, this is us looking at the surface from above. And this is the result of a direct light which becomes a harsh light because it really accentuates these lines, really accentuates any kind of tiny imperfections that you might have on any surface. So again, whether you're looking at a carpet or your skin or an asphalt road or anything, you start seeing these very accentuated lines. Okay, let's talk about diffused light in contrast. So again, we are dealing with exactly the same kind of surface. So some kind of a jagged surface. And now let's say that we have our light source over here and we're going to be working with the sun. But in addition to that, let's say that we have some clouds. So there is a sun, but there is also clouds. These are probably not the best, most beautiful clouds you've ever seen, but let's say that we have a lot of clouds. Now, when the sun hits the clouds, when the light hits the clouds, the light becomes diffused. So what happens is some of this light is going to go through, right? And it's going to hit here. Other one is going to bounce up. Some of the light is going to be bounce up. Some of the light is going to bounce this way. The nature of the clouds is that it changes the direction of the rays of light in a way where you end up having the light diffused and go into all sorts of different directions. And what happens, how does that affect our surface here? Well, we end up having exactly the same amount of light falling on this side as on this side. So this side gets the same amount of light as this one. And if we were to look at this surface from above, you might see a little bit of these edges, but they are definitely not as defined as you would see them with harsh light, right? I mean, you don't have these deep shadows that you had before, because this side is about the same brightness as this one, and usually you don't see these lines that defined. So this would be an example of a soft light. Now, soft light is soft because it's diffused. So when you have a lighting situation where light is diffused and hits your subject from many different angles, that is what creates soft light. So soft light is soft, appears soft because it is diffused light. Now, harsh light, on the other hand, is harsh because it is very direct. The light arrives very directly, hits the subject in a very direct way. There is not much diffusion going on. It hits from one angle, and by hitting from one angle, it casts deep shadows. And this could be deep shadows of large objects, or it could be deep shadows on a really tiny texture or somebody's skin. Like wrinkles, for example, would appear very defined under harsh, direct light. Wrinkles don't appear very defined under soft light because light is so diffused and hitting us from so many different angles that it nicely fills into the wrinkles, and everything just appears nice and even. Again, when you think about light quality, it really helps to think about these two opposites: harsh, soft, and of course we know there is everything in between. This wall over here has exactly the same texture as this wall over here. And in this picture, really the only difference that you see is that this wall over here is brighter. And that's about it. I mean, this is exposed, this is direct light, right? This is direct light. This is the harsh light that I'm talking about, harsh light. And this over here would be the indirect soft light. And the difference, of course, is that this wall receives light directly from the sun, and this wall receives light that is diffused, which is diffused because it bounces off all over the place. So the sunlight, for example, could come in from here, bounce off of the floor, and hit it from here. Fall in from here and bounce off and hit it from here, and some of the light hits it from here and some of the light hits it from here. It hits this wall from all over the place, usually being bounced off indoors somehow, right? But the whole point is that this wall receives light from all sorts of different directions. All right. So now let's take a look at close-ups, because I also took close-ups of this wall and this wall. So first let's take a look at the close-up of the harsh light, direct light wall. And here it is. Now if you look very closely, you will see that there are very clearly defined bright sides and darker sides, and you can see these shadows. Now let's take a look at the close-up of the wall that's in the shade. And here it is. It looks completely different, doesn't it? I mean, it really looks like a different texture altogether. It is the same texture. It's kind of hard to believe. I mean, you would have to be here to actually look at it and compare and touch it to know that it is the same texture, but it appears so dramatically different because of the quality of light. And here we have both textures side by side. So we have the direct light producing harsh light over on the left side, and we have the result of a soft light on the right side. It's easy to see the direction of the light when you look closely over here, and you can see clearly now that this wall receives light from all different directions. Now, if this was not the wall, if this was your skin, which one would you rather be working with? Which light would you be rather working with? We have a cloudy day in Hawaii. A very cloudy day in Hawaii, which is great. I'm really glad it's happening right now, because this is a perfect example of diffused light. Before I was outside here at noon, and there were no clouds, the sun was hitting me directly. It was a very harsh light, and you could see it was very harsh light because you could see a very clearly defined line where it was a bright side of my face and the darker side of my face. Right now, when you look at me, we have a pretty even light, right? It is pretty even. It's like this side is pretty even as this one. You don't really see any deep shadows. Everything seems to be pretty even. And even if I were to zoom in really, really close on my skin, you would see that everything is kind of even. And that's usually what you want if you want to have a flattering portrait photograph, right? You kind of want to have a nice even light. You don't want the light to be too harsh. You don't want the huge differences between bright and not bright. And right now we have the sun coming out for just a second. So let me just show you an example with a huge difference, right? And here it is. You see, the moment I stepped into this harsher light, just pay attention over here. Before you didn't really see this in diffused light, right? But now you can clearly see defined lines over here. You see these lines over here? I'm going to make the red disappear in just a second. Here it is. Just pay attention again. This area where you can see clearly direct light is hitting my face, and the lines that you didn't see before suddenly are pretty obvious. This is your harsh light at work. So let's talk about light quality when I step into the shade. I was over there in the sun before. I decided to step into the shade. And one of the common mistakes that I see people make is think that, well, if I'm in a shade, it's going to be too dark for me to take a picture. Because if I'm standing outside and I look into these shady, shadowy areas over here, they just look dark to me. And I feel like everything over there is going to appear dark. But keep in mind that that's what the adjustment on your camera is for. You can adjust your camera. You can have your camera adjust automatically, like mine is right now, where you can adjust your camera manually. So you can make that image brighter, even if you are in a spot that appears a little bit darker. So I am standing in more of a shaded area right now, and you can tell that the light on my face appears softer. And what I mean by softer is when you pay attention to the shadows on my face, the dark areas on my face versus the brighter areas on my face, there is a gradual transition. So if I stand like this, for example, you can see right here, this would be probably the brightest area on my face. And when you look into like my color over here, that would be probably the darkest area in your picture right now. Or you can see a little bit of a shade over here too. But just looking at the face, you have the brighter area here and you have a darker area here, and you have a very gradual transition from one to another. And that creates a very soft light. I mean, that's the result of a very soft light. And again, why is the light so soft over here? Well, the reason it's so soft is because it is hitting my face from many different directions. And again, I am standing in the shade, I am not standing under direct light, so I'm not necessarily getting light directly from the sun. I'm still getting it from the sun, just not directly from the sun. The sun hits the ground over there, the light bounces off these walls, bounces off the ceiling, bounces off from all different directions. And when light bounces off from all the different directions and hitting my face from many different directions, that creates a much softer light. So that's the diffused light in an outdoor situation. You don't necessarily have to have any lighting instruments to create diffused light. You can find diffused light very easily when you're outside. And again, that's something you should be paying attention to. If you do want a little bit more of a flattering look for diffused light. Look for a situation, for a setting like this, where the light bounces off all over the place, and then when it hits you from different directions. So in a picture like this, obviously it was my goal to create a image of a very soft skin, right? And in order to do that, I looked for a very soft light. And the way I accomplished this, well, first of all, I picked a setting that was a little bit shaded. We took these pictures at the entrance to the Aiea Loop Trail, and so there is a lot of trees over there. That's one of the things I like about that trail. There is a lot of shade in there. And on top of that, I also positioned her so the sun, the visible sun, was behind her. So I was working with only diffused light on her face. There is no directional light on her face. It's only the diffused light that I was working with. There is no additional lighting instruments. There is no lighting kits whatsoever. No bounce boards, bounce cards whatsoever. It's just the natural light bouncing off of the trees, the grass, the ground, and the nature all around. And again, notice that you can actually see some harsh light in the upper left corner. So here was just a matter of positioning her, in a way where the harsh light was hitting the back of her head. The harsh light actually caught some of her hair over here, but her face, that's all diffused light. That's all indirect, diffused, soft light.